At 10:30 hours on May 26, 1941, Flying Officer Dennis Briggs sat in the second pilot's seat of Catalina Z-209, watching his American co-pilot Ensign Leonard Smith ease the flying boat through thick cloud at 500 feet above the North Atlantic. They had been airborne for 8 hours, searching a patrol area 690 miles west of Brest, France. Fuel was getting low, weather was deteriorating, visibility was less than a mile in rain and low cloud. They were looking for Bismarck, the German battleship that had sunk HMS Hood 3 days earlier and disappeared into the Atlantic. Every available British warship was searching 200,000 square miles of ocean. 48 hours had passed since anyone had seen the battleship. She could be anywhere. She was probably heading for Brest, where Luftwaffe fighters and U-boat protection would make her untouchable. If the British didn't find her in the next few hours, she would escape. Briggs was exhausted. RAF Coastal Command had kept every available Catalina flying continuous patrols for 48 hours. Crews were flying 15 to 20-hour missions, pushing the flying boats to their maximum endurance. Z-209 had taken off from Lough Erne in Northern Ireland at show 2:30 hours, climbed slowly to 2,000 feet, and headed southwest into weather that got worse with every hour. They had been in cloud almost continuously since dawn. At 10:30 hours, Smith started a gentle descent to investigate a darker area in the clouds ahead. It might be a ship, it might be a shadow. Probably it was nothing like the dozen other false contacts they had investigated that morning. The Catalina broke out of cloud at 500 feet. Smith and Briggs saw it simultaneously. Dead ahead, 6 miles away, massive and unmistakable, a German battleship. Briggs grabbed the radio transmitter. His hand was shaking. In a few seconds, he would transmit the signal that would bring the entire British home fleet down on Bismarck's position. But first they had to survive the next few minutes. Because Bismarck had spotted them too, and every anti-aircraft gun on the battleship was tracking the lone flying boat that had just ended her chance of escape. The story of how a lumbering patrol bomber designed for long-range reconnaissance became the aircraft that found the most hunted warship in the Atlantic began a decade earlier in San Diego, where Consolidated Aircraft was designing flying boats for the United States Navy. In 1928, the Navy issued specifications for a patrol bomber with range of 2,000 miles, endurance of 12 hours, and capability to carry 2,000 pounds of bombs or depth charges. The specification called for a flying boat that could operate from water bases worldwide, conduct long-range patrols over open ocean, and engage enemy submarines or surface ships. Consolidated Aircraft, founded by Major Reuben Fleet in 1923, had established itself as America's premier flying boat manufacturer. Their chief engineer, Isaac Ladden, designed the Model 28, which first flew in March 1933. The Navy designated it XP3Y1 and ordered it into production as the PBY, where P indicated patrol, B indicated bomber, and Y indicated the manufacturer Consolidated. The production PBY-1 entered service in October 1936. The aircraft was a parasol-wing monoplane with two 900-horsepower Pratt & Whitney RR-1830 twin Wasp radial engines mounted on the wing. The fuselage was a boat hull designed to take off and land on water. The wing was mounted on a pylon above the fuselage to keep engines and propellers clear of spray during water operations. Dimensions were substantial: wingspan 104 feet length, 63 feet 10 inches height, 20 feet 2 inches. Empty weight was 17,500 pounds. Maximum loaded weight was 34,000 pounds. The two R-1830 engines provided 200 horsepower each in later models, driving 3-blade constant-speed propellers. Performance was modest by contemporary standards. Maximum speed was 196 miles per hour at 8,000 feet. Cruising speed was 125 miles per hour. Service ceiling was 18,200 feet. But the critical specification was range 520 miles at cruising speed, or over 20 hours endurance with auxiliary fuel tanks. No other operational aircraft in 1936 could match this range and endurance. The crew varied from 7 to 10 depending on mission: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, flight engineer, radio operator, bow gunner, 2 waist gunners, and sometimes a radar operator. The pilot and co-pilot sat side by side in a cockpit with excellent visibility through large windows. The navigator worked at a table in the bow compartment using celestial navigation, radio direction finding, and dead reckoning to fix position over open ocean. Defensive armament consisted of 3 to 5 .30 caliber or .50 caliber machine guns in nose, waist, and ventral positions. Offensive armament included 4,000 pounds of bombs, depth charges, or torpedoes, carried on external racks under the wings. Later versions carried air-to-surface rockets for attacking submarines. The most distinctive feature was the retractable stabilizing floats mounted near the wingtips. For water operations, the floats extended to provide lateral stability. For flight, they retracted into the wingtips, reducing drag and improving performance. This ingenious system made the PBY stable on water while maintaining reasonable flight performance. Water operations required skill and experience. Takeoff technique involved slowly advancing throttles while holding the control yoke full back to keep the bow high. As speed increased, the pilot gradually lowered the nose to get the hull on the step, where water flow transitioned from displacement to planing mode. Once on the step at about 40 miles per hour, the aircraft accelerated rapidly. At 70 miles per hour, the pilot rotated and lifted off. Landing technique was even more critical. The pilot had to judge altitude precisely without instruments, since altimeters were useless below 100 feet. Landing too high meant stalling and dropping into the water. Landing too flat meant the hull could skip and bounce. The proper technique was a gentle descent at 70 miles per hour power on until the hull kissed the water and settled into displacement mode. Rough water complicated everything. Waves higher than 3 feet made landing dangerous. Waves higher than 5 feet made landing nearly impossible without damage. Pilots learned to read wave patterns to land parallel to swells to use power to control descent rate precisely. Many Catalinas were damaged or destroyed in water landings that went wrong. The PBY's long range made it ideal for patrol missions over vast ocean areas where no land bases existed. By 1939, the U.S. Navy had 16 patrol squadrons equipped with PBYs operating from bases in California, Hawaii, the Philippines, Alaska, and the Caribbean. The aircraft's ability to operate from protected harbors, sheltered bays, and seaplane tenders gave it enormous operational flexibility. When war began in Europe in September 1939, Britain immediately recognized the PBY's value for anti-submarine warfare and maritime patrol. The Royal Air Force ordered PBYs through the Lend-Lease program. The British called the aircraft Catalina, a name that eventually became universal. First deliveries arrived in Britain in March 1941. RAF Coastal Command assigned Catalinas to long-range patrol squadrons operating from bases in Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Iceland. The mission was hunting German submarines and surface raiders in the North Atlantic, protecting convoys bringing supplies from America to Britain. The Catalina's 20-hour endurance meant it could patrol areas 700 miles from base, far beyond the range of land-based aircraft. By May 1941, RAF Coastal Command operated 3 squadrons of Catalinas 209, 210, and 240 squadrons. The aircraft were brand new, crews were still training, and maintenance was challenging because British mechanics were unfamiliar with American aircraft and engines. But the Catalinas were operational and desperately needed. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. German surface raiders were prowling the Atlantic, attacking convoys and tying down British warships. The most dangerous raider was Bismarck, Germany's newest battleship. Commissioned in August 1940, Bismarck displaced 50,000 tons, mounted 8 15-inch guns, and could make 30 knots. She was the most powerful battleship afloat, designed to break into the Atlantic and destroy British convoys. Admiral Günther Lutyens, commanding Operation Rheinübung, planned to use Bismarck and heavy cruiser Prince Eugen to ravage British shipping while the Royal Navy scrambled to respond. Bismarck departed Gotenhafen, Germany, on May 18, 1941 with Prince Eugen. Swedish reconnaissance spotted the German ships transiting the Kattegat. British intelligence alerted the home fleet. Admiral John Tovey, commanding from HMS King George V, deployed forces to intercept. HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales were ordered to Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland. HMS Norfolk and HMS Suffolk patrolled the strait with radar. On May 23, Suffolk's radar detected Bismarck and Prince Eugen at 19:22 hours in Denmark Strait. The German ships were heading southwest into the Atlantic. Suffolk and Norfolk shadowed while Hood and Prince of Wales closed at maximum speed. The forces made contact at 05:35 hours on May 24th in the Battle of Denmark Strait. At 0600 hours, both sides opened fire at 25,000 yards. Hood engaged Bismarck. Prince of Wales engaged Prince Eugen. The engagement lasted 21 minutes. At 0600 hours, Bismarck's fifth salvo struck Hood. A 15-inch shell penetrated Hood's deck armor, reached a magazine, and detonated 100 tons of cordite propellant. Hood exploded and sank in 3 minutes. Of 418 men aboard, 3 survived. Prince of Wales continued engaging, but was hit 7 times and forced to break off. Bismarck was hit 3 times by Prince of Wales. One hit flooded compartments forward, contaminating fuel tanks and forcing Lutyens to reduce speed. Another hit caused oil leakage that left a visible trail on the ocean surface. The damage was not critical, but it changed German plans. Lutyens decided to proceed to Brest for repairs. Prince Eugen was detached to operate independently. Bismarck would run for France while British forces scrambled to intercept. Admiral Tovey ordered every available warship to converge on Bismarck's estimated position. But first they had to find her. Suffolk and Norfolk continued shadowing using radar, maintaining contact through the day on May 24th. But at 03:06 hours on May 25th, Bismarck altered course sharply and disappeared from Suffolk's radar. The German battleship had evaded her pursuers. For the next 31 hours, nobody knew where Bismarck was. She could be heading for France, heading for Norway, or doubling back toward Germany. 200,000 square miles of ocean had to be searched. Admiral Tovey had limited search assets. The home fleet included carriers HMS Victorious and Ark Royal with reconnaissance aircraft, but carrier aircraft had limited range and endurance. Coastal Command had Catalinas with 20-hour endurance, but few were available, and crews were inexperienced. Every available aircraft was thrown into the search. The search pattern was based on estimated positions, assuming Bismarck was heading for Brest at various speeds. If she was making 25 knots, she would reach Brest by May 27th. If she was making 20 knots due to damage, she would arrive May 28th. Coastal Command assigned patrol areas in arcs from 400 to 700 miles west of Brest. Aircraft would fly outbound to their patrol area, search for several hours, then return. 209 Squadron at Lough Erne in Northern Ireland had 7 serviceable Catalinas on May 25th. Squadron leader Geoffrey Bowhill planned to launch all 7 on extended patrols covering different sectors. The crews were exhausted from flying continuous patrols since May 23rd, but there was no choice. Finding Bismarck was critical. One of the 7 Catalinas was Z-209, piloted by Flying Officer Dennis Briggs with Ensign Leonard Smith as co-pilot. Smith was one of several U.S. Navy officers attached to RAF Coastal Command as advisors before America entered the war. Officially, American officers were training British crews on Catalina operations. Unofficially, they were flying combat missions in British aircraft. The arrangement was technically neutral, but effectively an act of war. Z-209 took off from Lough Erne at 02:30 hours on May 26th. The crew consisted of Briggs Smith navigator Sub-Lieutenant David Leach, 2 other British officers, and 4 enlisted men. Their assigned patrol area was the southwestern sector 600 to 700 miles west of Brest. Weather forecast predicted clouds, rain, and poor visibility. Estimated time on patrol was 9 hours with 20 total hours airborne, including transit. The transit to the patrol area took 4 hours. Leach navigated using G-Navigation System, a radio navigation aid that provided position fixes accurate to within 5 miles. The system worked only within 400 miles of transmitters in Britain, so Leach would have to rely on dead reckoning once they reached their patrol area. At 06:30 hours, Z-209 arrived at the patrol area and began searching. Visibility was poor, clouds were at 800 feet, rain was continuous. The Catalina descended to 500 feet to stay below the cloud base, giving them about 2 miles visibility. Smith flew while Briggs and the other crew members scanned the ocean surface for ship's debris or oil slicks. For the next 4 hours, they saw nothing except gray ocean and low clouds. At 10:15 hours, fuel state indicated they had 3 hours remaining before they had to turn back. Briggs decided to continue the search for another hour, then head for base. At 10:25 hours, Smith noticed a darker area ahead in the clouds. He descended to investigate. At 10:30 hours, Z-209 broke out of clouds at 500 feet. 6 miles ahead, a massive gray shape resolved into a battleship. The profile was unmistakable German battleship with distinctive clipper bow and massive superstructure, Bismarck. Briggs's first action was to duck back into the clouds. If Bismarck's anti-aircraft guns opened fire, the Catalina was dead. At 500 feet and 110 miles per hour, they were a perfect target. Briggs pulled up into the clouds, climbed to 1,000 feet, and circled back while Smith transmitted the sighting report. The message went to Coastal Command headquarters. One battleship bearing 240 degrees 5 miles course 150 degrees speed, 20 knots position 49 degrees 33 minutes, north 21 degrees 47 minutes west. Time of origin, 10:30:26. The most important signal of the entire Atlantic campaign. Bismarck was found. But transmitting the signal took several minutes, and during those minutes, the Catalina was flying blind in clouds while Bismarck steamed away at 20 knots. Briggs had to maintain visual contact or risk losing the battleship again. He descended back to 500 feet, broke out of clouds, and spotted Bismarck 6 miles away. The battleship was zigzagging, making it difficult to establish her base course. This time, Bismarck's anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Heavy flak burst around the Catalina, black explosions at 500 feet altitude. Briggs jinked the flying boat left and right, making it difficult for German gunners to track. Smith continued transmitting contact reports with course and speed updates. The Catalina had to stay close enough to maintain visual contact, but far enough to avoid being shot down. For the next hour, Z-209 shadowed Bismarck from 6 to 8 miles distance, circling in and out of clouds, transmitting position updates every 15 minutes. German anti-aircraft fire continued but remained inaccurate. At 11:30 hours, a Swordfish torpedo bomber from Ark Royal arrived and relieved the Catalina. Briggs turned Z-209 north toward Lough Erne, 690 miles away. They had enough fuel for the return flight with minimal reserves. The crew was jubilant. They had found Bismarck. The entire home fleet was converging on the position they had transmitted. But they were also exhausted. They had been airborne for 9 hours, much of it in turbulent cloud under continuous strain. Smith flew while Briggs dozed. Leach navigated using dead reckoning because they were beyond G range. Z-209 landed at Lough Erne at 17:30 hours after 15 hours airborne. The crew was debriefed immediately. Intelligence officers wanted every detail, exact position, course, speed, damage, visible anti-aircraft fire patterns. The information was transmitted to Admiral Tovey aboard King George V, now racing toward Bismarck's position at maximum speed. But Tovey had a problem. His battleships were 125 miles from Bismarck, too far to intercept before the German ship reached air cover from France. His only chance was to slow Bismarck with air attack, giving the battleships time to close. Ark Royal launched 15 Swordfish torpedo bombers at 18:50 hours on May 26. The slow biplanes found Bismarck in deteriorating weather and pressed home torpedo attacks from multiple directions. One torpedo struck Bismarck's stern, jamming her rudders hard to port. The battleship could no longer steer. Her speed upped from 20 knots to 8 knots as she circled helplessly. Engineers worked desperately to free the rudders, but the damage was too severe. Bismarck was crippled, unable to maneuver, heading nowhere. That night, British destroyers found Bismarck and conducted torpedo attacks that further damaged the ship. At dawn on May 27, King George V and HMS Rodney engaged Bismarck at 16,000 yards. The German battleship fought back for 90 minutes, but was systematically destroyed by British guns. At 10:36 hours, Bismarck sank. Of 2,200 crew, 115 survived. The sinking of Bismarck was a decisive victory for the Royal Navy. Germany never again attempted to operate battleships in the Atlantic. The threat to convoys from German surface raiders was eliminated. but the victory depended entirely on the Catalina sighting at 10:30 hours on May 26. Without that sighting, Bismarck would have reached Brest. The entire strategic situation in the Atlantic would have changed. Flying Officer Briggs and Ensign Smith became heroes. Briggs received the Distinguished Service Order. Smith received nothing officially because America was not yet at war, but within the U.S. Navy he was recognized as the officer who helped sink Bismarck. The incident demonstrated that American neutrality in 1941 was a convenient fiction. American officers were flying combat missions, engaging enemy forces, and dying alongside British crew members. The Bismarck operation demonstrated the Catalina's strategic value. Long-range reconnaissance could locate enemy forces in vast ocean areas where finding them was otherwise impossible. The PBY's 20-hour endurance and ability to operate from advanced bases gave it capability no land-based aircraft matched. For the rest of the war, Catalinas would patrol every ocean hunting submarines, shadowing enemy fleets and conducting search and rescue. In the Pacific, Catalinas operated from seaplane tenders, providing reconnaissance hundreds of miles from aircraft carriers. During the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Catalinas from Midway Island detected the Japanese carrier fleet approaching, giving American forces time to prepare. During the Guadalcanal campaign, Catalinas provided night reconnaissance, detecting Japanese naval forces approaching under cover of darkness. Catalinas also pioneered anti-submarine warfare tactics that would become standard. Equipped with radar magnetic anomaly detectors and depth charges, PBYs hunted submarines across the Atlantic and Pacific. The Black Cat squadrons operating at night with radar achieved remarkable success against Japanese submarines and surface ships. The slow, vulnerable flying boat proved surprisingly effective as a hunter-killer. Search and rescue became another critical mission. Catalinas could land on water near downed aircrews, rescue survivors, and take off again even in rough conditions. Hundreds of Allied aircrews were saved by Catalina rescue missions, often conducted under fire or in terrible weather. The PBY's ability to land anywhere on water made it the only aircraft capable of open ocean rescue operations. Production of Catalinas continued throughout the war. Consolidated built 20398 PBYs at San Diego. Canadian Vickers built 369 additional aircraft under license. Boeing built 240 PB-2B1s and PB-2B2s variants with different equipment. Naval Aircraft Factory built 156 PBN-1 Nomads with revised hull design. Total production exceeded 3,300 aircraft, making the Catalina one of the most produced multi-engine aircraft of World War II. Catalinas served with 15 nations during and after the war: United States, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Netherlands, Soviet Union, France, Norway, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and others. The aircraft's simplicity, reliability, and versatility made it ideal for nations with limited maintenance infrastructure. PBYs operated from remote bases with minimal support, requiring only fuel oil and basic spare parts. After World War II, Catalinas continued military service for decades. The aircraft's long-range and water-landing capability remained valuable for maritime patrol, search and rescue, and anti-submarine warfare. Some nations operated military Catalinas into the 1980s, over 40 years after the type's first flight. No other World War II patrol bomber achieved such longevity. Civilian operators used Catalinas for air cargo firefighting and passenger transport in remote areas. The aircraft's ability to land on water made it invaluable in regions where lakes and rivers were the only landing options. Bush pilots operated Catalinas in Alaska, Canada, and South America, carrying freight and passengers to communities unreachable by other means. In the 1960s, converted Catalinas became aerial firebombers, dropping water or fire retardant on forest fires. The large hull could carry 1,000 gallons of water scooped from lakes while taxiing at high speed. Firefighting Catalinas operated in California, Canada, and France, saving thousands of acres of forest. Several firebombing Catalinas operated into the 2000s, 70 years after their original construction. Today, approximately 60 Catalinas survive in museums and private collections. Fewer than 10 remain airworthy. Maintaining 80-year-old flying boats is expensive and challenging. Parts are unavailable. Mechanics who understand radial engines and fabric-covered control surfaces are rare. Every flight requires extensive preparation, and risk management. But owners persist because the Catalina represents aviation history that deserves preservation. The survivors include several aircraft with combat histories. Catalina N97 Link 7, operated by the Catalina Preservation Society in Britain, flew search and rescue missions during World War II. Catalina N285, operated by the Commemorative Air Force in Texas, served in the Pacific Theater. These aircraft fly at air shows, connecting modern audiences with the generation that flew PBYs in combat 80 years ago. The Catalina's legacy extends beyond its military service. The aircraft pioneered long-range maritime patrol, proving that reliable multi-engine aircraft could operate over open ocean for extended periods. The PBY's success influenced post-war patrol bomber designs, including the P-2 Neptune, P-3 Orion, and P-8 Poseidon. Modern maritime patrol aircraft are faster and more sophisticated, but they trace their lineage directly to the Catalina. The flying boat's operational flexibility, demonstrated by operating from protected harbors, sheltered bays, and open ocean, influenced thinking about amphibious aircraft. The concept that aircraft need not depend on prepared runways enabled operations in remote areas where building airfields was impossible. That capability remains relevant today for disaster relief, medical evacuation, and operations in undeveloped regions. But the Catalina's most important legacy is its role in decisive moments like the Bismarck hunt. One aircraft in the right place at the right time, flown by a skilled crew, changed the course of a campaign. The Atlantic in 1941 was contested by hundreds of warships, thousands of merchant ships, and numerous submarines. But the decisive moment came when a single Catalina broke through clouds at exactly the right position to spot one battleship in 200,000 square miles of ocean. That moment depended on the PBY's capabilities' 20-hour endurance that allowed patrolling 700 miles from base, reliable engines that ran continuously for 15 hours, rugged construction that withstood turbulence and weather, and simple systems that crews could operate with minimal training. The Catalina made the mission possible. Briggs and Smith made it successful. Together, they demonstrated what patrol aviation could achieve. On that morning of May 26, 1941, when Flying Officer Briggs ducked Catalina Z209 back into clouds after spotting Bismarck, when Ensign Smith transmitted the sighting report that brought the home fleet down on the German battleship, they were proving what thousands of other Catalina crews would prove throughout the war. The slow, unglamorous patrol bomber could achieve results that faster, more glamorous aircraft could not. They found what needed finding. They reported what needed reporting. They stayed on station when staying meant being shot at. They completed their mission and brought their aircraft home after 15 hours airborne in terrible weather. That was what Catalina crews did. That was why the PBY mattered. The aircraft was not fast. Maximum speed of 196 miles per hour meant any fighter could catch a Catalina. The aircraft was not heavily armed. A few machine guns provided minimal defense against determined attack. The aircraft was not glamorous. Flying boats were uncomfortable, noisy, cold in winter and hot in summer. Long patrols meant 15 to 20 hours of monotony, interrupted by moments of terror. But the Catalina could fly for 20 hours over open ocean. It could operate from water bases worldwide. It could find enemy forces that no other aircraft could find. It could rescue downed air crews from open ocean. It could sink submarines with depth charges. It could be maintained with basic tools and spare parts. And it did all these things reliably, day after day, year after year, across every ocean of World War II. That reliability, that endurance, that unglamorous capability made the Catalina essential to Allied victory. Not through dramatic combat, not through tactical brilliance, but through persistent professional execution of missions that had to be accomplished. Maritime patrol, search and rescue, anti-submarine warfare, reconnaissance. Every mission essential, none glamorous, all completed by crews who flew the PBY because somebody had to, and the Catalina was the aircraft that could. The battleship Bismarck was found because a Catalina flew the right patrol pattern, because the crew maintained visual search despite exhaustion, because engines ran for 15 hours without failure, because the aircraft could fly at 500 feet in rain and low cloud. All routine capabilities executed routinely by a routine crew. That routine excellence changed history. That is the Catalina's legacy. That is why the flying boat legend endures.